Next, on this episode of The Nice Guys on Business.
Yes, some people are crushing it directly from their podcast, but I think when people get scared off or think, well, am I going to make money right away? They ignore the bigger picture, the internal or the intangible benefits that come from it. Like you said, the network you build, the referrals that you get from that, and then on the other side, what you learn from these people you bring on the show. So I just wanted to add that in for anybody considering podcasting.
Don't drive angry. Well, it's hard not to when you're listening to The Nice Guys on Business. Go from where you are now to where you could be. Get expert tips to grow your business, to be more productive and more efficient, whether you're trying to build influence, grow your community, or make it rain. Best-selling author of Nice Guys Finish First, Doug Sandler, can lead the way. The Nice Guys on Business is produced by Turnkey Podcast Productions. Now, here's your host, Doug Sandler.
Nice Guy community, are you ready to find your why and live your purpose? Corey Poirier, he's a multiple-time TEDx speaker, a PMx speaker, a multiple-time MoMondays speaker, and the founder of Blue Talks. He's also an international best-selling author and Forbes and entrepreneur columnist. Corey has been featured twice on the popular Entrepreneurs on Fire. Geez, is that I forget that. Is it JLD, right? Is that I think that's right. He's on that show. We don't worry that he's competing with us. No, because there is no competition. It's only goodness and nature with JLD. And he has been personally interviewed, or he has personally interviewed over 5,000 of the world's top influencers. That's kind of where I want to start. Welcome, Corey, to the Nice Guys on Business podcast.
Thank you so much, Doug. I'm so super stoked to be here. And yeah, it definitely is the JLD show for sure.
Yeah, I figured as much. So wait a minute. I thought I was crazy. I've done literally, we've done 1,020 interviews as of the recording of this. And I would say maybe 750 or so were interview shows. So and I know that I've been doing this for 5 years. How have you done 5,000 interviews?
So I will tell you, that's one of the first questions almost everybody asks. And, not to give John any more plug, but one of the coolest things was on his show. He said, you're the first person I've had on the show who's interviewed more people than me. And then he added in, which I love, as he said, but I will catch you. And I'm sure he will. But here's how that happened, Doug. I would love to say it was all through the podcast, but it wasn't. So the podcast, the numbers are probably closer to 1,000, maybe 1,200. So similar numbers to what you mentioned. And that, as you know, is a big number. But where it started for me was I had a newspaper for almost 7 years. It was a small business newspaper, but it was run by me. And so what I did was I hired freelance writers to write the articles, but I, for whatever reason, was obsessed with interviews. So I would go out and do all the interviews. And in a given month with 40 pages, and almost everything we did was interviews or articles, I ended up doing 80 to 100 interviews a month, monthly, for 6 years. So that's how it happened.
How exhausted were you at the end of your month? I mean, you just had to, that was literally all day, every day. Because I know I do 3 interviews sometimes in a day just to kind of do some batch recording. And I'm freaking exhausted, man.
Well, tired, and add on to that as well, traveling between the interviews, because these were all in person. Now, having said that, it was a small little place where, and I'm not joking when I say this, you can drive from one end of the place where I grew up to the other end in about 8 minutes. So driving wasn't really that big of a factor, but yeah, even lining them up. So I think in the average day, I was probably doing 6 to 8. And doing that regularly, and then farming the rest of the stuff out to other people. Like I had a graphic designer designing it. I had somebody helping to sell the ads. And then when I sell ads, I'd sold them on longer packages so I didn't have to resell them right away again. And then I'd hire freelance writers to write the articles. So really, I was just obsessed with interviewing people.
So you were the interview guy, the sales guy, the editor, the owner, the chief executive officer, and the influencer of all of this one little publication.
I did have other people helping me. Like I actually hired a graphic design firm, and they were technically the editors, whereas I was more the publisher. But yeah, you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, I had freelancers working with me, but it was still me getting the coffee for everybody.
All right, I got to ask I got to get into some personal stuff then. Do you have a family that would stand by for that? Because I'm sure this was no 40-hour-a-week job. I know that already. It was many more hours than that.
It sure was. And I'm going to say the latter part of that, I also added in speaking and traveling to speak. So that, not for the faint of heart. But to answer your question, I was certainly single at that time for most of those years. I think I was with somebody in a relationship for 2 years of the 6.5, 7 years that I ran that. But right now, my girlfriend and I have a 2.5-year-old son. And even though I travel a lot for speaking, I don't think I would have got away with doing what I was doing with that paper.
I have a huge, not that I didn't have respect for you before, just meeting you and knowing you and watching some of your interviews and knowing who you have had a chance to rub shoulders with. But it is just a huge amount of respect for you in just doing that sheer volume, because again, as I create my my podcast production business over the last 3 years or so, Turnkey Podcast, what's so amazing about the excuses that you get from some wannabe podcasters, and even some people that are under our umbrella that pay a lot of good money to get hold of our elite coaching services. Just because you pay doesn't mean the work is going to get done. It's like paying for a gym membership and never going. But for you to have all of those interviews under your belt, I mean, huge props to you, man. I mean, that's well appreciated, well respected, and you've earned everything that you have had just based upon that interview number alone.
Well, I have to say thank you, and I will add, I'd love to pretend that the obsession left me for interviews. And Napoleon Hill, that was the second book I ever read in my life, was Think and Grow Rich.
Yeah.
And I became obsessed with the stuff that Napoleon Hill did, interviewing the highest of achievers, the influencers, learning what they do and sharing it with others. But just to tell you that this hasn't changed, even now that I have a 2.5-year-old, I'm working on a documentary project. We've been calling the Slightly Secret Project. But just to give you a perspective on that, I think it was April. Yeah, April. I did, 22 interviews. Now that sounds a little bit smaller, like one a day roughly. But here's the catch.
Doesn't sound small to me. It sounds still pretty huge.
No, but I'll go one step further. In between that, I traveled. I mean, I won't go bring you through the whole thing, but I traveled between Florida and California. Actually, even in one day, I did an interview at San Francisco in the morning with John Gray, Men Are From Mars, John Gray, and then flew to San Diego and interviewed Lisa Nichols that night. And I did that for a month. So this is even now, like this is only April, this past April. And I did, I think it was 22 or 21 interviews in 20 days, 20 business days, basically.
Well, just based upon the numbers alone, when you had pitched me to come on the show, I was really at a spot where I said, I'm looking at my schedule and looking at Corey, and I know Corey, and I've had a chance to meet and hang out with Corey at New Media Summit and heard some great things about him. I'm talking to my nice guy community right now, Corey, just to give you a little bit of accolades here. So my schedule is filled. I look at my schedule and I literally am filled between now and March. And I said, I've got to figure out a way that I can open some time for Corey. And I justified it by doing this interview exchange with you. I said, hey, I'll invite you on my show. Would you invite me on your show? Would you graciously accept it? And it was so nice of you to do that. And again, you find the time to do the important things in your life. And in your case, you have found the time to do the major amount of interviews. And again, huge props to you. You have earned the respect of so many people that are out there just because of, people see it and they look at like your how many episodes do you have out of your podcast right now? I know you have a newer show and an older show, I think. Don't you have a couple shows that are out?
Yeah. And I want to say the older show, I think it's probably 700. It's in that range.
Right.
And then, because of course, for me, I would go to my Libsyn and see how many, it has like one of. And so I would just basically multiply 10 by whatever that is now. And I think it's around 700. And then I have a Get Paid to Speak podcast, which is a newer one. And I say newer, I think it's 2.5 years old, but that one has close to 100 episodes now. And that one's not as frequent as the other one. So I think those two together have about 800.
Well, again, a huge amount of respect for you for what you've accomplished. And I think you probably similar to me, we have maybe some similar goals in that, I selfishly do the podcast because of the amount of free coaching that I get as a result of it. So I said, hey, I'm going to have Corey on my show. Yeah, my schedule is a little bit jammed, but maybe I could learn some things from Corey and see what he's done, because I always thought that I was pretty prolific in doing my interviews, and I start seeing those numbers again, not to dwell on the numbers, but it's like, holy mackerel, dude, this is just incredible. And I respect what you've been able to accomplish, knowing what I've gone through just to do what I've done.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, what's the number? you'd probably know these a little bit better than me. I think I heard it from Rob at Libsyn at one point.
Yeah.
But I think the numbers I heard from him was that the average podcast lasts 9 episodes or something like that.
Somewhere between 9 and 12. I keep hearing both of those numbers bantered about. Yes.
So to your point about interviews, right? If that's the average, and assuming that there are interview shows in those cases, in some of them at least, and they're doing one interview a show, that means the average person interviews that's in the podcasting world, maybe 9 to 12 people if they don't do another podcast again in their life. So yeah, when you're doing, like you said, you're up over 1,000 episodes. I mean, that's a huge thing. It puts you probably in the top 1% of people that are in the podcasting.
Well, again, I look at that, some people, and not to dwell on podcasting as our topic here, because I definitely want to talk to you about your book and some other stuff that you have accomplished as well. But what's interesting about it is that I have been doing this for 5 years and over and over and over again. And I am doing it. The hidden gift that I have gotten from podcasting is I'm not, it's the network that I've built. I'm not doing podcasting as a side thing over here. This is now a major, it's an incorporated, instrumental, very important piece of my entire business model. And without the podcast, most of my business model kind of falls flat. I don't have a marketing plan other than my podcast. I don't really have a sales plan outside of my lead generation that I get from my podcast. Really, my entire business revolves around. I even shifted and pivoted my career based upon my podcast, because I was a professional speaker in 2013, turned podcaster to promote a book I had coming out, and thinking, man, I'd much rather make money in my pajamas than I would going out and as you see, traveling between. I was traveling from Baltimore. I wasn't quite going to the West Coast, but I was doing a lot of Midwest, a lot of Florida, a lot of DC, and just like I was traveling way too much for the money that I was making. I'm like, let's make money from our pajamas. Why not do it this way?
Yeah, absolutely. And Doug, I'll add something here if that's okay.
Yeah.
Especially for people that are listening to this and saying, maybe I want to get into podcasting. Could it be my approach to influencing, or could it be my approach to building as you said, a business behind it? And it's interesting. I had Jordan Harbinger.
Yeah, know him well.
Regular podcast listeners would know Jordan, of course, both from The Art of Charm and then from his own show now, both top-rated shows. And I asked Jordan the question during an interview. I said, what would you recommend to somebody who wants to launch a podcast? And it took me back a bit, which was great, because you like having those conversations that surprise you. But he said, I would tell them not to start a podcast. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I know if I would have put the same amount of time into YouTube as I have into podcasting, I would probably have a lot more subscribers, followers, what have you. And he said, people don't realize how much work is involved in putting a podcast together. And so I'll tell you, for a little while, when people would ask me, I would share that because I wanted to give them the true picture. But here's the part that was left out for me. So then I looked at myself and reflected on it, and I realized what you just said, which is huge, Doug, is outside of what we're learning from people that we interview, meaning they become your coaches, as you mentioned. Right. There's the other side, which is that the network that you build. So those interviews I mentioned, I did 21, 22 days in a month. I'm going to guess that I would have had a hard time interviewing Lisa Nichols, Les Brown, Jack Canfield, if I didn't have a podcast already behind me.
Yes.
And actually a history in interviewing some of the people that I interviewed again. And so to that point, if I look at it now, my network came because of my podcast. Mm-hmm. The people that I spend the most time with, the people that have joined my program, my speaking program, I'm going to guess 50% of them somehow, some way, indirectly, we got connected through my podcast, and on and on and on. So the point is that if you just look at it from a pure financial results directly from the podcast, yes, some people are crushing it directly from their podcast. But I think when people get scared off or think, well, am I going to make money right away? They ignore the bigger picture, the internal or the intangible benefits that come from it. Like you said, the network you build, the referrals that you get from that, and then on the other side, what you learn from these people you bring on the show. So I just wanted to add that in for anybody considering.
Oh man, well said. Well, this is probably why you're a professional speaker, and I put aside my professional speaking career, because it takes me about an hour to say what you just said in about 60 seconds. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and I would love to get you back on to my Turnkey Podcast coaching calls, because I think it's so important to hear that over and over again. Because as someone that has made a living at podcasting as I have, I don't forget what made the business successful, but I remember, the thing I remember the most was that literally that 17 or almost 18 months of struggle that I went through in the beginning, thinking, why am I not seeing any direct results from my show? Thinking advertising and sponsorship, which is generally how people think about when they talk about monetization. They don't think about this hidden gift of this network that you have built. And finally, there was an aha moment when Steve Olsher came on my show, and I started thinking, I'm just doing something wrong. I need to be able to focus a little bit differently on what is the network worth to me? What is the affiliate relationships? What are they worth to me? What are my joint venture partnerships? What are they worth to me? What are all of these things that are intangibles that you get, but as a direct result of having your podcast, and without it, you don't have those things in your life.
So true. And, even just one of the things that, at the New Media Summit that Steve talks about is even just the fact that you can give more value to somebody and at the same time direct them to a place where, let's say, and I'll just use the example, they can grab a free book of yours.
Right.
I mean, it's even that side. You have people that join your community and start to get to know you. You can direct them in that direction by having a podcast or being on a podcast, which you can't do if you don't have. So yeah, there's so many intangibles that people don't realize. And like you said, it gets powerful when you start looking and saying, wow, most of this wouldn't have happened if I didn't have the podcast. And I'll add in with social media. Same thing. People duck out of social media so quickly because they're saying, well, I'm not seeing results right away. But as a speaker, I can tell you, Doug, I'll have people that I don't know they're watching, but they'll tell me, 2 years later, I saw you spoke at this one event. We finally have our event coming up. Could you do the same thing at our event? And I didn't know they were watching me. So If you just thought direct result right away, you'd think, well, they're not reaching out right now. They're not looking, but people are paying attention. They're watching and they're listening.
Great advice. Great advice. And thank you for helping me just to kind of get that message a little bit more clear with those in our community. I really do want to pivot a little bit here because I feel like I have not properly served you at all in this, Corey. So I want to share a little bit with my community the reason why you're here and the stuff that really you're able to make a living at, the things that have really propelled your business and your success from where you started to where you are right now. So maybe share a little bit about your backstory. I know that you were in the newspaper, in the publishing business for a while, but I would love to tie that into, you're a professional speaker. You've done a multiple time TEDx speaker. You've created your own speaking program as well. And you have all of these things that you do in addition to the fact that you're a best-selling author as well. So maybe share a little bit of your backstory, why these things were so critical to you, and then take me through like the maybe the timeline of how these things came into your life as a career.
Yeah, well, I have to say, I think where it started, Doug, is if I go back to, let's say, I had a corporate sales career for a number of years. So probably in total about 10 years, I was in corporate sales working for first a Fortune 500 company and then a Global 1000 company. And while I was doing that, the last probably 4 years of that career, I actually wrote a stage play that I put in a Fringe festival, and I wrote and directed it, but I had no interest in being on the stage. I was terrified of the idea of standing, which is kind of ironic, but terrified of standing in front of an audience, which has helped me because people say, can you learn this? And yeah, I'm proof. I have those early videos of me covered in sweat. I passed out at one talk, that type of stuff. All the stuff you think, I actually lived it. Nice. And so having said that, I had the stage play in a Fringe Fest. One of the actors sprained his ankle and didn't make it to the show. Or I'll correct that. He made it to the show, but he couldn't carry all of his parts out because he was the lead actor. And so I had to write in a couple other characters to buy him time for his costume changes. Mm-hmm. But the problem was nobody else knew the lines except for, guess what? The writer-director. The only guy didn't want to be on stage. So as the joke goes, but it is true, I wrote myself 2 parts. And what I did was I wrote myself parts that I wouldn't have to face the audience. I could just have my back to them. And then I wore a wig and Hulk Hogan t-shirts. And the whole idea was I didn't want to be recognized or see the audience. And so I wrote these 2 parts, finished the play up, and I asked one of the actors on the way home from literally, it was the last night of the play. And I was like, his name was Andre. I said, Andre, how can I get over this fear? Because obviously if I'm going to keep writing and stuff, there's going to be times that I need to get on the stage. And he told me about the stand-up comedy workshop at the university. And I said, that sounds terrifying. Let's do it. So we did 2 weeks of here's how you adjust the mic stand. And I think at the time the comic was in love with Steve Martin. So he said, here's how you adjust the mic stand. And then he told us why Steve Martin was awesome. That was our whole training for what obviously is the number one fear in the world. They say public speaking is the number one fear above death. And I would say comedy is way above public speaking. It's that so few people ever try it. They just don't rate it. And so what happened was week number 3, we went to a comedy club and we were told we were going to be entertained, but we found out 5 minutes to showtime, we were the entertainers. Whoa. And that's the start of my speaking career because I ran into the bathroom trying to find an exit window that didn't exist. 8 people of the 15 that signed up for that workshop walked out the front door and left. By the time I get out of that bathroom, 8 were gone. There were 7 of us left. And I actually went on stage that night, bombed horribly. Didn't know I didn't have the mic turned on for the first 2 jokes. It was a horrible mess. But I went back the next week because I had survived. And I went back the following week. And so to take this full circle, what happened was after doing that for a little less than a year, I saw Tony Robbins speak and somebody said, it's amazing he's getting paid to do this. And I said, wait a minute, you can get paid to do this? Mm-hmm. And then that's when everything changed. So I approached a local community college, sold them, ironically, after a year of selling them on why they should have a sales program. And they finally believed me that they should. And I started working with them. And that's where it all really started for me. So I stayed with my corporate career for about another 2 years. And then I eventually, which just goes back to, I went full-time about 2006 as a speaker. I had been speaking for about 4 years before that, at that point. But because, I stayed on my career, I guess it was maybe 3.5, 4 years. But I went out speaking part-time, used all my vacation days, holidays, evenings, all that kind of stuff. And then eventually decided to go full-time. But that's, we can go deeper than that or in a different direction, but that's kind of in about 3 minutes how I got into speaking.
Well, so advance me to the book, because Corey wrote, Nice Guy Community, Corey wrote a book called The Book of Why and How, and we'll make sure we put a link in the show notes. It's basically thebookofwhy.com, just so you have access to that. But what was the inspiration behind the book, and when did that really start to develop its own set of parameters in which, hey, I'm going to write the book because this is what's happening in my life right now?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And it's funny because the two worlds intersect in some ways, because what I didn't share is in that corporate career, the only exposure I had to the idea of a speaking career was a gentleman who a lot of people listening will know the name of probably, Zig Ziglar.
Sure.
And I was given 25 business cards and they told me to write my name on them. And they handed me a VHS, if anybody knows what a VHS is still, with Zig Ziglar. And I watched that and I was like, this is, I would love to do this. And then it went away from there. But here's how the book sort of came out of that is I recognized as well with a Fortune 500 company, that was a really piss poor training program. A videotape and 25 cards. That was my whole training program to work in one of the toughest sales industries in the world, selling photocopiers door to door. And so having said that, that was a catalyst. And I talked about this actually in the first of the book. That was a catalyst for me becoming a speaker and an author, because years later, I decided I didn't want anybody else to go through that kind of situation that I went through. So I wanted to make sure that everybody had access to some form of training, whether that was through a speaker or a book or what have you. And so going full circle, what happened was about 4 years ago, I would say roughly, I started writing this book and I wrote it in pieces. And it really is the book I feel like I've been writing for 10 years, even though it technically started physically 4 years ago. But the book, that's it. Basically started me working on it as almost like separate books. So what makes this book really unique, I feel, is it's separated by 3 acts. And each of those acts, you can read them and they stand on their own, which is rare for a book. So what I did was I broke it down to 3 sections. One is called Why. The next section is called Thriving. And the third section is called Enlightened. And so the why is, of course, the part of the book of why. The how is the thriving part, and enlightened is how can we do all this stuff that we're doing and still sleep at night. And so what I did was I separated them by chapters in a way that if you already had found your why, you already knew why you were doing it, you had already been serving your purpose, you can jump to the act 2. Even though I recommend you read all 3. But anyway, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but the point is the book itself was, I feel, started whenever I had that whole moment of the Zig Ziglar thing and nobody else should have to go with their training. And then as I was doing these 5,000 interviews, the book was coming to life while I was doing those. Mm-hmm. And then about 4 years ago, I started taking what I'd learned during all these interviews and putting them into a book finally. And then it took about 2 years to get the book out. And this is the part I didn't mention earlier. I actually self-published it at first. And as you know, it's rare to go from self-published to published. Mm-hmm. But I self-published it first. And it did really well. And long story short, Morgan James decided to pick it up. And now we're finally bringing it to the world as a published book in more bookstores. That's the easiest way to say that. So
the book, Nice Guy Community, the book again is called The Book of Why and How. The subtitle, Discover the Timeless Secrets to Meaning, Success, and Abundance. And I want to say this certainly with all due respect to you and what you've been able to overcome and deal with in your life and all of the stuff that you've been able to accomplish, these goals. But where do you find the capacity to have the ability to instruct on discovering the secrets to the meaning of success and abundance? Now, I'm not saying that you're not worthy of that. I definitely think that you do, but that is a huge subject to take on. So maybe you can share a little bit about why you're the right person to tell this, to share your message and these secrets.
So I think there's a two-part answer to that. The first one I will talk about and this to me comes back to the meaning, which is if you're living on purpose. My experience is the people that are living on purpose, I call it vitamin P. They're taking vitamin P. And essentially it's a vitamin you can't buy in the store, but every person needs to take. Mm-hmm. And they say that less than 5% of people in their whole life will discover their purpose. But what I found, Doug, the people that do, they're sick less often. People want to be around them more. They accomplish more. They can push through when other people can't. And so first of all, to answer that side of it, because that relates to the meaning. If you find your purpose and you're living your purpose, that really relates well to having meaning in your life. And I find the people that have purpose truly have meaning in their life. So let's say maybe in what capacity do I have sort of the qualifications to talk on that? I really feel it's because I was somebody who was drifting. I talk at the first of the book as well about, I compare two people. And then the reveal is that I'm the same person. And so the person before I discovered my calling and my why was that I was the person that was sick all the time. I was a pessimist. And I can tell you that because I battled generalized anxiety for 2 years. And then that morphed into hypochondria for another 2 years. And I'm a firm believer you can't be living your purpose fully and have that much passion in your body equal to the exact same amount of negativity it takes to be a pessimist who also thinks you're going to die every day. And so I think, first of all, I lived it. So I wasn't a person that was, let's say 6 years old and started teaching my teddy bears accounting and then knew I wanted to be an accountant. I was somebody who in my mid-20s finally discovered my calling and my why. So I think it's because I lived it. I know you can discover it and I know how I did it and I reverse engineered it and was able to say, this is how I discovered it. But then let's couple that with the fact of doing over 5,000 interviews, asking people about passion and purpose. I got to see how other people had found theirs. And so that's on the side of helping people find the meaning. On the other side, which is the abundance and success, that one I think really ties into these interviews. When you're interviewing, and I'll just name drop only because it backs up what I'm saying. It's related. Yeah. But if you talk about somebody who I mentioned the name Les Brown earlier or Bob Proctor, I mean, these people have risen to the top 1% of their industry. And in fact, that's usually, I interview a lot of people that are just starting, but I really do try to chase the people that have reached the top 1% of their field. And I want to learn from them. So when you start looking at those people, the Jack Canfields, the Mark Victor Hansons, JJ Virgins of the world, what I want to figure out is how do they get to the top of that field? And I want to dissect that. And then I want to look at what are the common traits they share with the other ones who got to the top 1% of their field. And so I guess my second part to the answer, as far as the qualifications, is I've technically done I won't even call it mini. I've done a pretty extensive research project just by nature of, first of all, interviewing that many people, but then secondly, dissecting it and figuring out what makes those people tick, what made them successful, and even what were their setbacks and what were the struggles. So I hope that answers the question, but I think it's because of the amount of research I put into doing this.
No, I completely agree with you, and I think research is the best prover of is the best evidence for some great success. Is that if you've done the research and you find this, and I'm curious because I want to take a slightly different direction or maybe a deeper dive into this. I wasn't sure I was going to go here, but you kind of set it up perfectly for me, is that what are some of those things that all of these people have in common? I've asked that question of a number of people that I've interviewed on the show, but you have a much bigger set of interviews that you have done. So I'm curious, is there a common denominator among all of these people that have been able to find the meaning of life, the success and abundance in their own lives? What is a common element that they all have?
So I'll give you, if it works, if we have time to do that, I'll give you three, but I'll give you them really quick. The first one, the number one will be really easy, but I'll start with three. It's always best to have a surprise and build people up with the anticipation. So I'll start with the third most common trait. And by the way, I mean, I know the top 10, but I'll share three, obviously.
Okay.
And so the third, and this one here might surprise a lot of people, or maybe it won't, but it's one that surprised me, and it came out of coincidence. It wasn't from questions I asked. It was from observation. And then all of a sudden, I said, I need to dive deeper into this. But I call it the power of no. And really what it relates to is the high achievers, the top influencers say no. And I don't know the percentage of how much more, but I'm going to guesstimate at least 5 times more than the average person. So what do I mean by that? I mean that when people ask one of these influencers who's managing so many things, reach the top of their field, can you take on this task? Can you help me with this? They're more apt to say no. Or if they're a type of person that can't say no, they have people hired to screen people out. And a great example is if you or I wanted to pick up the phone and call Tony Robbins through the main phone line, what are the odds we're going to get Tony on the phone? It's
0.
I would say it's 0 or less than 0. And so he has people, whether it's intentional in some cases or not, but he has people hired to screen us out. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but he can't take on everything that comes his way.
Correct.
And so Richard Branson, I remember he used to have a thing where he said, please definitely send this to us. I have a team that'll look at this and see if it's a project we're interested in, and then we'll let you know. But he didn't say, here's my email address. Send this to me and we'll talk.
Right.
So they say no, whether, again, it's intentional or not. They say no more often than everybody else. And so I think that's one of the big things I've discovered is most people wait until they're too busy where they have to say no. So they're so busy, they have to say no. And one of the things I wish more people would see sooner is the benefit of saying no, even when you can't afford to say no.
Yeah.
Whenever you're an early speaker and you're only getting 1 booking a month, you still should be saying no to certain bookings. But people love to prove that wrong and try to take on more than they can to prove it wrong. But and there's the whole thing, say yes to everything, figure out how to do it later. What I can tell you is that rarely works for highly successful people.
Well,
that's number 3.
What I found, and I just want to attach something onto that. What I found, and I've shared this with my community many times. In 2019, one of my intentions, one of the goals that I set was to stay in my zone of genius, and that would be. And I'm not saying that from an ego perspective. I'm saying that I know what I do well, and I know what I don't do well. Things like spreadsheets and operations and systems development and back end non-customer facing stuff is not my strength, and to stay out of that stuff. So. My goal in 2019 was to stay in my zone of genius, which was selling and building relationships. And I have found a definite upturn in business and the way that I look at things also. And my schedule and my stress and my anxiety has gone so low as a result of that. I mean, not that I don't have room to improve, but at the same time, for me, it wasn't just saying no, it was saying yes only within my zone of genius, which is, again, further helps me narrow down the things I even have an opportunity to say yes to.
Yeah, I love that approach. And for me, I always say it's saying no to the things that don't move the needle so you can say yes to the things that do.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, every time you say yes to something, you have to say no to something else. And you might not say the words no, but you are automatically saying no to something else. And, so that's one aspect of it. But the other side where people, I think, struggle the most is knowing how to say no and what to say no to. Yeah. So it's easy for me to say that, but how do you know what a no is? And super quick, and this is in the book, but I talk about the importance of writing your personal mission statement. Every great company we know that survived and usually thrives during recessions has a great mission statement, and mostly the employees know it, whether they know the words or not. So, like, for example, Disney, they say we want to make everybody happy. We're the happiest place on earth. Their employees know that, whether they know that's the words. They know that that's what they're trying to do. And so, first of all, how do you know what to say no to? Well, what I recommend is people write a personal mission statement. And so mine is to be the guy who motivates, donates, inspires, educates, and entertains. And the benefit of that, Doug, is that if somebody asks me to take something on, if it's one of those, it's the easiest no without regret I'll ever say. If it's 5 of those, it's the easiest yes I'll ever say without regret. And then, of course, if it's 2 or 3, then I got to think about it for a little bit. Yeah. But the great part about that is it allows me to know what is a no and what is a yes. And then the second part to that is, how do you do it and not burn all these bridges? Chalene Johnson said this in an interview one time to me, and I always shared this example because it sums it up perfectly. But her company, her and her husband, Brett, they talk about how they're very family oriented. So when she got really busy with Turbo Jam and with her Instagram business, when people would say, can you take this on? She would say, look, I need to talk to Brett and see what else we have on the go. We're a family run business and I just don't want to interfere with something to do with the family. So can I get back to you in a couple of days? And then she said, if I can't do it, I'll find somebody who can. So think about that, Doug. If somebody says that to you, I need to check with the family because I don't want to interfere with anything. I'll get back to you right away. And if I can't do it, I'll find somebody who can. It's really hard for somebody to get mad at you when you take that approach.
Very true.
And so that's how you can say no. So that's the summation of the power of no in about 5 minutes.
Okay. And you have 2 other points. I want you to make those also because I think that the power of no is an important one too. What are 2 other secrets of success?
Yeah, so I'll give you these ones quicker. The second one is, I call it, here's how I describe it. I say lifelong learners are leaders. And you notice I don't say readers are leaders and I don't say leaders are readers because, and this is so appropriate. We're in a podcast right now. Now, if you go back 40 years, 50 years ago, you would have almost had to been a reader. If I wanted to say readers are leaders or vice versa. So I got away from saying readers are leaders, first of all, because you can read 50 Shades of Grey all day long, but it doesn't mean you're going to become a leader.
Yeah.
And we could, that there's a whole different direction you could go with that when I use the words 50 Shades of Grey. But my point is that it depends on what you're reading. And secondly, the cool thing now is you don't have to be a reader. You can just be a lifelong learner without even ever reading anything. I'm a reader. I love reading books, but you don't have to be. You can watch TED Talks. You can watch YouTube videos. You can listen to podcasts. You can read Success Magazine, or you can read a book. So there's lots of opportunities to learn. But the key takeaway here is the people that are leaders, typically speaking, never stop learning. And to give you a great example, I mentioned Jack Canfield earlier. I had him on the show, and he was talking about going to Tony Robbins seminars. And I had somebody else on his show probably a week later, and I was talking about that. And they said, "Oh, that's so cool you mentioned that," because I was at an event about 3 months ago that Jack was at of Tony's. And he said, I watched this cool experience. And he said, I was at the back of the room and I watched Jack taking all these crazy notes. This is a few years ago. So Jack was like 68. And he said the guy beside Jack at the next table was about 19 and looking over Jack and shaking his head and not paying attention. And he said, I thought, how appropriate is it that 19-year-old needs those notes of Jack's more than anything in the world? And Jack probably doesn't need those notes at all. He can go backstage and talk to Tony. And yet Jack still sees the need to take them. So what I'm getting at here, the takeaway is, people that understand the power of becoming leaders also understand the responsibility of to feed their mind. They keep feeding their mind long after school is done. So basically they self-educate. And the cool thing is this hasn't changed in a lot of years, because if you think about it, the lifelong leaders of yesterday, even if they only finished grade 3, they still had a personal library in their house. Henry Ford, Thomas Edison. We went to Concord, Massachusetts, Ralph Waldo Emerson's home, and his personal library was bigger than a lot of the libraries at the time. So what I'm getting at is this idea of becoming a lifelong learner and always trying to keep learning and keep feeding your mind. It hasn't changed in a lot of years, and the top people will always be the ones, in my opinion, who are willing to feed their mind the right things in the right way.
All right, 3 secrets. We've gone 2. The power of no is 1, and lifelong learners are leaders. How about the number 1 reason why people are successful?
So the number 1 readers is a great segue back to the book if we finished off talking about it. But it's actually basically that the highest of achievers live on purpose. And just to dissect that for a second, what I mean by that is that they've found their purpose. I used to say passion, but to me, passion is what you do and purpose is why you're doing it. And so passion can change 100 times. Purpose usually won't change. So if we focus on purpose, they're living on purpose. They figured out what their calling is, what they're put here to do. And to your point earlier about being in their genius zone, they spend most of their time serving that purpose.
I think that's and I'm sorry, I was taking a sneeze break there, and I was waiting for the sneeze to come out, so you didn't quite hear it. We'll edit that out. I don't think Strickland has ever edited anything out of any of these shows, but that's okay. So, Nice Guy Community, you'll hear a nice little pause there for just a quick second. I think that's so true. I think that the highest of achievers, I want to even take it one step further. They live on purpose, but in order to live on purpose, you have to first be conscious. And there are so many people that just go through life unconscious and just let life happen. They're a part of somebody else's plan. I mean, I forget what the saying is, but it goes something like, you're either a part of your plan or you're a part of someone else's. You should really be a part of your own plan. That's how you set proper goals. And so many people just live an unconscious life, and they don't put themselves in a position to ever win because they don't think that they have any control of their own life. They're letting other people make all of the decisions for them.
Yeah, I love that. And for whatever reason, it popped into my head, something that Robin Sharma said during an interview. He said that most people die at 20, or stop living if you want to use that word, but I think he said die at 20, but they wait until they're 80 to be actually buried. And he said, he calls them the walking dead. But really what he was talking about at the time was the people that sadly walk around without any purpose or calling in their life. So it just, to me, that's it triggered from what you just said, but I think he summed it up well too, the walking dead.
So, Nice Guy Community, again, the book is called The Book of Why and How, and it is available at thebookofwhy.com. And I highly encourage you. Obviously, you see from just 30 or 40 minutes of conversation that Corey is the right guy to get this message from, and he has done the walk. He doesn't just talk the talk, he's walked the walk. He's interviewed all of these top leading successful people in their life, and that he has really, really condensed it down into an easy to read, easy formatted book. The book comes out, when is it? It's on pre-sale right now, right?
Yeah. So if somebody's buying and wants to buy the paperback, it's pre-order right now, drops March 17th. And then another super quick thing as well, and I shared this with you too, Doug, is in March, actually correct that, February 18th, I believe, is a Tuesday. So February 18th for the week, from the 18th, I believe it's to the 25th, we're going to be putting the book down, the Kindle version and the digital version down to 99 cents. Wow. And during that timeline, if people grab a copy of the book then and send us an email, and we're going to add the email to the website, but if they send us an email with the receipt, then we're actually going to give them access to our $400 speakerpreneurship, authorpreneurship masterclass that we not too long ago charged that price for. We're going to do that, but I'll add in as well, because I always feel for the person that hears this after the date. So if you hear this after the date, also send us a receipt that just to show us you bought the book via email. You can send it to conversationswithleaders@gmail.com, and I'll still give you something. I'll figure out a gift to give you.
Figure
out
the gifts. Cool. So if you want to get a hold of the book, even in pre-sale, it's thebookofwhy.com. Again, your best bet to learning about how to find your purpose, how you find your meaning, and how to live your why and how to live on purpose. And I love all of those things. Just to review those 3 secrets of success. Number 1, understand and learn the power of no. Number 2, lifelong learners are leaders. And the number 1 secret to success, the common denominator among a lot of the people that Corey has interviewed, is the highest of achievers live on purpose. And I'll add my line, live consciously as well. So, Corey, man, I appreciate your message and what you're all about, and I really do appreciate having you on the show today. And I'm glad I took you up on this offer to come on the show. It was well worth trying to, with a crowbar and a jackhammer you into a spot. So thanks for being here on the show.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure, Doug, and the feeling's 100% mutual. And I look forward to us bringing you onto our show and getting inside your mind and sharing that with us.
Yeah, it's a hollow room, but you'll enjoy exploring it, I'm sure, a little bit. So thanks for being here, brother. I appreciate all you got. And Nice Guy Community, never underestimate the power of nice. As again, special thanks to Corey. All of his information, including access to his book and his website, will be right there in the show notes. Steve O'Brien, go ahead and take us out of here.
For the Nice Guys on Business, I'm Steve O'Brien. I would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for you meddling kids.